Welcome back to season 1 of our volunteer management podcast. Today we are diving into the world of effective recruitment and onboarding strategies. How can organisations attract great volunteers and ensure that they feel valued from day one? So let's find out. So my name is Daniella Abraham. I am the interim head of volunteering at NCT, and I'm joined today by volunteer manager Kathrine McCarrick. So our first segment is all about attracting volunteers with the right skills. And we're just going to have a chat about what are some proven strategies. So Kathrine, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about what some strategies are that can be used when attracting volunteers with the right skills.
Absolutely. So it's about quantifying the impact that volunteers have made towards the values of the organisation, the mission, and utilising those stories. So I know we quite often bring our volunteers in and hear the positive things that have happened in their community. It's just really nice to hear that, share that, and just illustrate the changes that volunteers have brought about. So as well as that, emphasising the benefits of volunteering. I know recently we've had, with it being sort of September, October, a lot of the university students coming through because it's going to help with their university degree, help them get a little bit more experience, find networking opportunities as well. So I think that helps a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's something sometimes that volunteers, especially in our organisation, forget. So we are, if you don't know about NCT, we are the charity that supports people as they become parents. So a lot of our volunteers are parents themselves. And I think sometimes when they go to recruit volunteers, they look for volunteers who are like themselves, who are a parent. And that's not necessarily always the right thing to do, because we're discounting a whole range of people who have different skills and things that they can bring to the charity. And I think students are a really important part of that, because there are a lot of students out there who need to get experience, and we can give them that experience, especially with roles like social media. We have a lot of students who are maybe studying social media at university or studying even English. You know, we have roles like newsletter writing roles. So somebody who is perhaps not studying something which is social media based could still volunteer with NCT and do one of the roles that we have. We also have a lot of finance students who get in touch with us because we have a treasury role. So you don't need to be experienced in finance, but it does give, sometimes 6 months, a year's experience that a potential student could use when they are applying for jobs. One of the things that we use in our charity a lot are volunteer platforms like the matching services, the volunteer centres, where we put our roles out there and the centres match the volunteers' skills to what we are looking for. And we find that that's quite a useful thing to use, like those kind of online platforms like Do It, platforms like Reach. So if there are specific volunteer roles that you are looking for, you find a lot of trustees on Reach. That's usually a good platform for that. Or even roles like our community builder role, where it isn't just your basic volunteer role. There is a time expectation of that role, and Reach is usually a good platform to use for those sort of roles. So roles that aren't just your basic volunteer roles. I guess one really important thing to think about when you are looking for volunteers that have specific skills is your role descriptions. So how are your role descriptions written out, and how are you advertising these roles, making it really clear what is expected of the volunteer and what skills that volunteer needs to have. So having a clear role description, or when you're advertising your role on something like social media or a volunteer centre, making it really clear the skills that you're looking for in that volunteer. I think that's really important to make sure that you're getting the right people in the right roles.
Absolutely.
And also using social media effectively, and not just things like, Facebook or Instagram. There are a lot of people now on some of the other platforms like TikTok, for instance. And sometimes a written role while useful for some people, isn't useful for everybody. So perhaps thinking outside the box and doing a video, a kind of video recruitment to say what you're looking for, because not everybody is going to even be able to look at a written role description. So if we're thinking about the kind of volunteers that we want to attract as well, perhaps thinking outside of the box when using social media too. Using case studies, that's a really useful one. I think you touched on that briefly, Kathrine. Putting case studies on things like Instagram or Facebook, and also getting volunteers who are currently doing a role to perhaps record a video as well about their experience and what they've gained from volunteering, and then they can talk a little bit about the skills that they had when they took on the roles and the skills that they've learned as well. Is there anything else that you can think of?
No, I think you've covered a lot of it, just utilising that social media, yeah.
So once we've got those volunteers, we've attracted them, it's really important then that we welcome them so that they want to stay. So let's just have a little think about the key steps in the onboarding process. And I know our onboarding process in our charity has changed a lot. It's still not perfect. It is definitely something that we will always be evolving. But I guess to start us off, I think the first thing is having that welcome when the volunteer gets in touch with us, having that welcome that's really personalized to them. We now have a video, so we have a video that a volunteer can watch when they first get in touch, and we have a little bit of a welcome that introduces them to the charity, tells them a little bit about the people that we support, and I think that's really important. So from the offset, they know who we are, what our purpose is, and see whether or not that is the right fit for them, because I think that's also important, that they have to be the right fit for us, but we also have to be the right fit for them. Is there anything that you want to add about the onboarding process?
I think the key thing there is listening to the volunteers as well. We have a really useful line when people sign up to sort of like any requirements, what is your preferred format of communication, because that it does differ. I know a lot of people might not want a phone call, they would prefer it via email, but sometimes that video call, that phone call, that does make all of the difference. So making sure it's personalised, as you say, that warm welcome to make sure volunteers think, actually, yeah, this is a good start to my volunteer journey. And then when you have done that welcome, just providing that effective training and support. So this is what the role has, this is what we can provide for you, and here's how we'll get there. You're not on your own to do this. We do have a comprehensive training program, and there'll be skills that you will learn from this, and just that ongoing mentorship between staff and the volunteer, because they're giving up their time for us. We want to make sure they're comfortable in their volunteering role, definitely.
Yeah, I think listening to the volunteer is a really important thing. And I know a lot of charities are similar to us in where we have staff who are based in an area mainly remotely, and the volunteers are spread out everywhere. And I think it's important to be able to offer the phone calls and video calls so that they know that we are real people and we're not just a robot on a computer firing emails out. I think it's really important to have that connection with the volunteers, because although we aren't always going to be able to meet them in person, you still want them to feel part of the community, part of the NCT family that we call it sometimes. And being able to have that visual connection, or even just that audio connection on the telephone with a volunteer, makes them remember that we are real people, and there are other people, and they're not just on their own as well. And I'm really interested. I'm always interested to hear what other charities onboarding processes like, and what they do and how they connect with their volunteers, because there are a lot of charities out there too who have staff in specific areas, so they're having that one-on-one onboarding where it's in person, where all of our onboarding is virtual, because we don't have staff in all of the areas where our volunteers are. So I think it's really important because of that from the outset we are being incredibly welcoming and inclusive for all of our volunteers as well, making it the environment that they want to be part of when they're volunteering with us. Now, we don't have big social events. We used to. Historically, we would have big events where volunteers could get together, and it was kind of a chance to sort of, was a little bit of a reward and recognition. But we can't do that anymore. So what ways, I guess, do we reward and recognise volunteers? Because I guess some people out there who are listening, I know lots of charities are in the same position. There just isn't the funding to go out there and pay a lot of money for all volunteer events or to even send physical things to volunteers. So what is it that we can do to make sure that our volunteers feel recognised, but also it's a low cost, it's low cost to the charity?
Yes, so I think that's where communication is so key as well. Just that regular, this is what's happening. We appreciate that. Thank you for doing that. So thanking them, that might be email, that could be social media posts, just that little shout out to say, look, this is what they're doing in this area and it's amazing. The thank you emails. Not everyone can send a thank you card, but that can be appreciated where possible. But those just opportunities, having maybe a Teams or a Zoom call every quarter even, just to say, let's get together. This is the community that we've created. And this is what amazing work we're doing. The social events don't necessarily have to be in person, but we can recognise people through other ways remotely.
Yeah, one of my favourite times of the year is actually Volunteers Week, when we have a spreadsheet that all staff have access to, and we get volunteers to nominate each other to say who deserves to have a call. Well, not who deserves to have a call, because all volunteers deserve to have a call. But if there are any volunteers in particular that we should give a call to hear about their, what they've been doing, what they've got up to, and just to thank them for volunteering with NCT. And it's something that all of the staff at NCT enjoy doing, and our volunteers love it as well, because many of our colleagues in our charity, they don't deal directly with volunteers, so this is the one time of the year where they can actually have those conversations with volunteers and hear about the amazing impact that they're having in their area. And I think it really reinvigorates the experience for volunteers too, because they're getting to speak to somebody and they love talking about what they do and the impact that they have with parents. And I think that's so important. So if we think about part of the onboarding process, one thing that is really important, and I think this is probably important across the board in terms of volunteer management, is having a volunteer agreement. That is a real crucial part of the onboarding process. So what should organisations require from volunteers? I guess we are, in our charity, we have two different types of volunteering. We have volunteers who are primarily peer volunteers who provide peer-to-peer support. And sometimes these are dealing with really vulnerable people in the community. And their volunteering process and their onboarding process is very different to the process that we have with our volunteers. So they take references and their volunteers are DBS checked because of the services that they are running. But it's slightly different with the volunteers that we support, because our volunteers don't run regulated services, so they don't have DBS checks and we don't take references. And the volunteers who do run activities and events for parents, they are not, the parents are the carers of the children that they are bringing along with them. So our volunteers don't have that same level of check-in. So there's different requirements. But I guess, why do we get volunteers to sign a volunteer agreement? What is the purpose of that? Let's have a chat about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about making sure that expectations are managed on both sides. So the volunteer understands, this is the role that I've signed up for, this is what's expected of me, but also this is what I can get out of it in return. So we as an organisation want to ensure that our volunteers are, I don't want to say standardised, but there is a sort of, we know what to expect when you sign up as a volunteer for us, but it's just making sure that everything is clear, concise, the communication is there. This is who you can contact if there is an issue or if you want to share something. And it's just having that in one place, really.
Yeah. And it's a two-way, isn't it? It's what we expect from them, but also what they can expect to receive from us, which hopefully is a great volunteering experience. And we've gone through lots of different processes of the volunteer agreement over the years, where we've had paper copies that have had to be signed by volunteers. But I guess if I had to share a top tip on how the volunteer agreement can be more efficient and user-friendly, it is to do it, to have it as an online form. So we currently have a Microsoft form which has what the volunteer is agreeing to. When they register as a volunteer, they click a button to confirm that they agree with the terms of the volunteer agreement. Once they've done that, then they can be registered as a volunteer. And I think having that online form, it takes away some of that back and forwards that you would get historically, where a volunteer would get in touch and then you would have to send something out to them and then wait for them to send them back. Whereas I think definitely having online forms makes that process a lot easier. Of course, if we've got a volunteer who gets in touch with us and they don't have access to an online form, maybe they've got in touch with us by telephone and they're not an internet user, then we could absolutely post a form out to them. But on the whole, I think definitely having an online form with that volunteer agreement has made things a lot easier for us. Is there anything else that we perhaps haven't covered in terms of volunteer onboarding and recruiting? Obviously, this session wasn't about recruitment. It was more about the onboarding session. There will be time for a recruitment session maybe in another podcast, but this was more based on the onboarding. But is there anything else that we haven't perhaps covered, or do you think we've covered everything?
No, I think we've covered everything. Just making sure that things are accessible for each and every volunteer, because what's accessible for one might not necessarily, as you just mentioned with the internet and the online forms, just having that backup plan just in case. So always making sure you've got something that is accessible for everyone, and those adaptations where needed. But no, I think we've covered a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you. So thanks, Kathrine, for joining me so that you can share your expertise on effective volunteer onboarding. And I think by implementing the strategies that we've briefly spoke about, organisations can build really strong and sustainable volunteer programmes. And remember, happy volunteers lead to a thriving organisation. The next episode that we do is going to focus on volunteer training and development, and we hope to see you then. Bye for now.
Bye.